Hello YouTube! In this video I'm going to outline one of the most influential arguments in contemporary philosophy, Hilary Putnam's twin earth argument. This argument occurs in Putnam's paper The Meaning of Meaning, and as the title suggests, this is an investigation of the notion of meaning. In particular, Putnam defends semantic externalism, the view that meaning is partly determined by facts that are external to the mind of the speaker. But we'll get to all of that. So first of all, to just sort of set up a bit of the background here, when we talk about meaning, it's standard to draw a distinction between extension and intension. The extension of a term is the set of all things in the world to which the term applies. So the extension of the term green is simply the set of all green things. It's the set of all things of which it is true to say, this thing is green. So, just imagine, like when you give an extension, imagine giving just a sort of list of all of the things in the world that to which the term applies. Now, there's clearly more to the meaning of a term than its extension. A classic illustration of this is, so consider the term caudate, which refers to creatures with hearts, and renate, which refers to creatures with kidneys. As a matter of fact, all creatures with hearts are creatures with kidneys, and vice versa, so caudate and renate are coextensive. These terms apply to exactly the same set of things in the world, but clearly these terms have different meanings. We want to say that they differ in content, or they're associated with different concepts, or something like that. Now, whatever exactly this something else is that makes them different, that's the intention of a term. So this is, when we talk about the intention of a term, we're talking about, what the term means, about the concept associated with the term. We're, at least in the rest of this video, when we talk about meaning, we're going to mean intention specifically. So according to Putnam, the traditional view of meaning rests on two assumptions. The first assumption is that knowing the meaning of a word, in the sense of knowing its intention, is a matter of being in a certain kind of psychological state. So some philosophers have held that meanings are literally mental entities. A meaning exists only in a person's mind. So when I use the term water, for instance, the meaning of this term is supposed to consist in some set of ideas or thoughts or images or whatever that are present in my head. Other philosophers, like Frege, have held that meanings are objective, mind-independent abstract objects that as such can be shared by people, right? So two different people might grasp the same meaning. Two people who use the word water both grasp the same meaning, and since they both grasp the same meaning, meaning can't be literally a private mental entity. But even if we take this sort of view, it's still going to be the case that grasping the meaning of a word is a psychological act, or the specific meaning that gets associated with a given word is going to be a matter of, the psychological act we perform in using the word. So even if the meaning of the word water is not literally a mental entity, grasping this meaning must be a matter of being in the right psychological state. So, there's a lot of heated debate about the metaphysics of meanings, but there's a general assumption that, understanding a word, grasping its meaning, is a matter of one's psychological state. Now, it's worth clarifying here as well that a psychological state is supposed to be a state that is private, in the sense that nothing about the external environment and nothing about any other person is presupposed in a description of a psychological state. So, in this sense, imagine a counterpart of me that is a brain in a vat. Its brain is molecule for molecule identical to my brain, but it's in a vat and it's being deceived by very clever neuroscientists. My brain in a vat counterpart has the same psychological states that I do, in the sense that we're using the phrase psychological state here. So first assumption then is that knowing the meaning of a word is a matter of being in a particular psychological state. The second assumption was that the meaning of a word determines the extension of the word. What makes it the case that the term water picks out the things that it does is the meaning of the term water. If the term water had a different meaning, it would pick out different things. So note that two terms may have a different meaning, but nevertheless pick out the same things, as we saw with caudate and renate, right? They have different meanings, but they have the same extension. They refer to the same things. And, the reason why they refer to the things they do is because of the meanings of those terms. So two terms can have the same extension but differ in their intension. By contrast, two terms cannot differ in their extension while having the same intention. Because, again, the intention is what makes the term have the extension that it does. So, if you have the same intention, you've got to have the same extension. Now, it is worth noting that this second assumption actually can't be true in general. So, classic challenge here comes from indexicals. These are words whose reference shifts in different contexts. Consider words such as I, or now, or today, or here. When I say it's raining today on a Tuesday, and you say it's raining today on a Wednesday, very plausibly our statements have the same meaning, the same intention. The word today, it means the same thing in each sentence. But when I say the word today, I pick out a different day than what you do, right? I refer to Tuesday, you refer to Wednesday. So it's generally acknowledged that indexicals like this will require a different treatment. But indexicals do seem quite different from, natural kind terms like green or water or tiger. So, the traditional assumption, at least as Putnam describes it, is that with these sorts of terms, the extension is fixed by the term's meaning. Okay, so these are the two assumptions then, right? First claim is that the meaning associated with a term is determined by the psychological states of the users of that term. So any two people who are in the same psychological state must be associating the same meaning with a term. The second assumption is that the extension of a term is determined by its meaning. It follows that the extension of a term is determined by the psychological states of the users of that term. So suppose that when Verity uses term A, it has a different extension from Sydney's use of term A. Well, by claim 2 here, the extension in each case is determined by the meaning. So if the extension is different, the meaning must be different. And then 1 tells us that if the meaning is different, Verity and Sydney's psychological states must be different. Now, Putnam's argument aims to show that these two propositions cannot both be true. There cannot be any concept that satisfies both of these notions, which means that the traditional view of meaning is false. More precisely, what Putnam aims to show is that, and I quote, "It is possible for two speakers to be in exactly the same psychological state, even though the extension of the term A in the idiolect of one is different from the extension of the term A in the idiolect of the other." And he introduces the twin earth thought experiment in order to argue for this. So let's turn to that. Okay, suppose that we have elsewhere in the galaxy a planet that we will call Twin Earth. Twin Earth is very much like our Earth. Its history is almost identical to our history. It contains a population of people who speak English, just like us. Indeed, we can suppose that everybody on Earth has a doppelganger on Twin Earth. There's a person on Twin Earth who does all the same things that I do, who's currently recording a video about Putnam's Twin Earth argument, and so on. However, on Twin Earth, the liquid that they call water is not H2O, but something with a very different chemical formula that we can abbreviate XYZ. The observable properties of XYZ, under normal conditions at least, are completely indistinguishable from those of H2O. So on Twin Earth, XYZ is clear, colourless, it quenches thirst, it composes the rivers and oceans, it falls from the sky when it rains, and so on. Putnam says that if we were to visit Twin Earth, we would assume first that when Twin Earthers talk about water, they mean the same thing that we do, namely H2O. But then when we investigate the liquid more carefully, we would discover that it's something entirely different. We would discover that when Twin Earthers talk about water, they're really talking not about H2O, but about XYZ. We discover that on Twin Earth, the word water means XYZ. Okay, so the extension of the term water, as it is used by Earthlings, is the set of all things composed of H2O molecules, or something along those lines. The extension of the term water as Twin Earthlings use it is the set of all things composed of XYZ molecules, or something like that. So the word water, as it is used on Twin Earth, doesn't actually refer to water, because water is H2O. Now, so far, there's no special problem here. I mean, we just have a word with two different meanings. Nothing special about that. But now Putnam asks us to turn the clock back a few hundred years, right? So consider Earth and Twin Earth around about 1750. Verity is an ordinary English speaker who lives on Earth. Twin Verity is her counterpart on Twin Earth. Now, since scientific understanding is still very limited at this time, Verity doesn't know that water is H2O. Indeed, Verity has no particular beliefs about the underlying chemical composition of water. She's never even conceived of H2O. Similarly, Twin Verity doesn't know that what she calls water is XYZ. She, again, has never conceived of XYZ. She has no particular beliefs about the underlying chemical composition of what she calls water. Indeed, we can suppose that Verity and Twin Verity are exact duplicates in terms of their mental states, their experiences, their feelings, their inner monologues. All of these are identical. So the history of Earth and Twin Earth is basically identical up to the point where the chemical composition of what people call water is discovered. So, Verity and Twin Verity are psychological duplicates. However, when Verity uses the word water, she refers to H2O. The extension of the word water, as used by Verity, is the set of all things composed of H2O molecules. The assumption here is that the word water had the same meaning and extension in 1750 as it does today. This, I suppose, is plausible, right? I mean, we do tend to assume that when people in the 1700s used the word water, they referred to the same stuff that we do, right? When we use the word water. That's why it makes sense to say that we discovered that water is H2O. We discovered that people were referring to H2O all along. We didn't change the meaning of the word water on making the discovery that water is H2O. So when Verity uses the word water, she refers to H2O. But when Twin Verity uses the word water, she refers to XYZ. The extension of the term water, as used by Twin Verity, is the set of all things composed of XYZ molecules. In this scenario, then, there are two people who have identical mental states, but where their terms have a different extension. So the extension of a term is not determined by the mental states of the speaker. That's basically the argument. So we can sketch the sort of general argument as follows, right? So premise 1, on Earth, water refers to H2O. Premise 2, on Twin Earth, water refers to XYZ. Premise 3, the word water had the same extension on both Earth and Twin Earth in 1750 as it has on each planet today. Premise 4, speakers on Earth and Twin Earth in 1750 had identical psychological states. Conclusion, the extension of the term water is not determined by the psychological states of the speakers who use that term. That's basically the argument. Now, it's maybe worth sort of just saying a little more about premise 3 here, this idea that the term water had the same extension historically as it has today. Because I suppose this is one obvious place where we might push back. Now, what Putnam suggests is that what's going on with natural kind terms such as water is something like this. When I point to a glass of liquid and I say, this is water, I'm presupposing that the liquid in the glass bears a special kind of relation to most of the other things that my linguistic community labels water. I'm presupposing that the liquid in the glass is the same stuff as, the same kind of stuff as, the liquid that falls from the sky, that quenches thirst, that composes the rivers and oceans, and so on. But exactly what it is that makes these liquids the same kind of stuff, exactly what the underlying microstructure of these liquids is, that may take a great deal of scientific investigation to uncover. I mean, and that's exactly what happened with water. In 1750, nobody knew about H2O. Over time, we discovered that being composed of H2O is what unites all of the things that were labelled water by our linguistic community. So the discovery of H2O did not change the meaning or extension of the term water. What happened is we learned more about what exactly water was. That's it. Okay, so Putnam concludes that the extension of a term is not determined by psychological states. In terms of the two assumptions of the traditional theory of meaning, Putnam favours retaining the second assumption, that meaning determines extension, at least for most natural kind terms. Again, you know, the indexicals like here and now require a different treatment, but for many terms we can retain assumption 2. For a term such as water, though, Putnam thinks that the twin earth case illustrates we should give up assumption 1. Right? Grasping the meaning of a term is not a matter of being in a special psychological state. Okay then, that's Putnam's twin earth argument. Now if you like my channel, you can sign up to my Patreon. Give me some cash, and you'll support the channel, and you'll also get access to bonus content that way. I've got a whole bunch of bonus videos available for my patrons. You can also just send a one-off donation on PayPal, and you know, any money that you can throw my way, it really helps. I offer private tutoring. I have a degree, master's and PhD in philosophy, so those are my qualifications there. Send me an email if you want to set any of that up. And you can join the Discord. Links to all of this will be in the description. And of course, if you can't do any of that, that's fine. At the very least, if you've made it this far in the video, give it a like, give it a comment. Let's help it with the YouTube algorithm. Okay then, let's get back to Putnam. So Putnam introduces another couple of examples that make a similar point with respect to meaning and psychological states. I won't go through all of them, but there is one that I'll look at is the example of beech and elm. So Putnam says that he does not know the difference between a beech tree and an elm tree. If you were to show Putnam pictures of trees, he wouldn't be able to tell which was a beech and which was an elm. And yet, when Putnam uses the word elm, the extension of the word is the same as the extension of the word when anybody else uses that word. So that is, when Putnam uses the word elm, the extension of the word is just the set of elm trees. Putnam could say, for instance, Delia loves elm trees, and in saying this, he successfully refers to elm trees. You know, I mean, in particular, when he says Delia loves elm trees, right, he's referring to elm trees, not beech trees. Even though his own internal concept of an elm tree does not differ from his internal concept of a beech tree. All he can say about them is, well, they're both trees, and that's about that. So imagine a different, you know, linguistic community. Imagine another twin earth who speak English, except that the meaning of beech and elm are switched. And suppose that Putnam has a molecule for molecule identical duplicate in that community. And here's what Putnam says, I quote, "It is absurd to say that his psychological state is one bit different from mine, yet he means beech when he says elm, and I mean elm when I say elm." So again, we have two subjects who have identical psychological states, but whose words have different meanings, right? I mean, the two people in this community, again, they're literally identical, okay? In terms of like the molecules that make up their bodies, completely identical. And all that's different in this community is that in the language used in that community, the meaning of elm and the meaning of beech are switched. But the thing is that Putnam and Putnam's doppelganger, they don't know anything about beeches or elms beyond the fact that they're trees, right? So their mental states are completely identical, and yet their words have different meanings. So again, you know, this sort of illustrates the failure of these two assumptions about meaning, these two traditional assumptions about meaning. Of course, if the point here can be made with such a mundane example as the words beech and elm, why bother with the original twin earth thought experiment? Why bother with all this stuff about water and XYZ and stuff? Well, there is an important difference between these cases. So in the beech elm case, what's going on here is our linguistic community also contains experts who do know how to distinguish a beech from an elm. So when I talk about beeches and elms, I can defer to those experts, right? When I use the word elm, I can intend to talk about those trees that the experts, the relevant experts, namely dendrologists, I can intend to talk about those trees that dendrologists call elm trees and that have the sort of properties that those experts ascribe to such trees, right? I'm deferring the meaning of the term to these experts. With many of the terms in our language, there is, as Putnam puts it, this division of linguistic labour. So, as a speaker of English, I need to acquire words like elm and beech, but I don't need to acquire any way of recognising whether something is a beech or an elm. Indeed, for many purposes, I need not acquire any internal mental concept at all of what beeches or elms are beyond the fact that they're types of tree. So when I use the term elm, the extension of the term is derived from the expert's use of the term. It's like whatever the extension is when the experts use the term, that's the extension when I use the term. And if you were to ask me what I mean when I say elm tree, I would probably make this deference explicit, right? If you were to, like, if I start talking about elm, I say something like, look, Delia loves elm trees. And then you say to me, well, what exactly is an elm tree? I would say, well, I don't know, ask a dendrologist, right? Ask somebody who knows about trees. So, people would probably make that deference to experts, that division of linguistic labour explicit. Putnam summarises the point. Whenever a term is subject to the division of linguistic labour, the average speaker who acquires it does not acquire anything that fixes its extension. In particular, his individual psychological state certainly does not fix its extension. It is only the socio-linguistic state of the collective linguistic body to which the speaker belongs that fixes the extension. And this is, of course, sufficient to challenge the two traditional assumptions about meaning. Still, a defender of the traditional view might sort of fall back on the following kind of position. We might grant that the extension of a term is not determined by the psychological state of the specific individual who uses that term, but rather we could say that the extension of a term is determined by the psychological states of the whole linguistic community, or maybe just specific parts of the linguistic community. So it's the psychological states of dendrologists that fixes the extension of the term beech, right? Like whenever you have this phenomenon of the division of linguistic labour, it's the psychological states of the relevant experts that fixes the meaning of the term. So yes, meaning is not fixed by the psychological states of a specific individual, but it is still fixed by psychological states. And I think that, sort of modifying the traditional view in this kind of way is probably independently motivated anyway, given that language is a public phenomenon, right? Language and meaning it's developed through social convention, through people interacting with each other, through people making noises at each other. So, I suppose there's probably some plausibility in this idea that, okay, well, sure, like when I use words, there's not necessarily anything going on in my own individual head that fixes the meaning and extension. It's rather that the meaning and extension is a matter of both what's going on in my head, but also what's going on in other people's heads. Now, the twin earth case, though, illustrates something more significant than this. The twin earth case challenges even this role for mental states. The extension of the term water is different on Earth and twin earth, even though everybody's mental content on each planet is the same. On Earth in 1750, nobody had identified water with H2O. On Twin Earth in 1750, nobody had identified what they call water with XYZ. So we can just suppose that the whole communities have exactly the same mental states with respect to the word water, the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same associations, the same images. Yet the extension of the term water on Earth differs from its extension on Twin Earth. So this shows that even the mental states of an entire linguistic community are not sufficient to determine reference. The meaning of a term is also influenced by the community's external environment. You have to get outside the head and get into what's going on in the world. So to know the meaning of a term like water, we would have to know what the mind-independent facts of the matter in the world are. That's Putnam's argument. Okay then, I'll end by considering a couple of objections. So I think that, one obvious worry about all of this is that In the twin Earth thought experiment, Putnam is ultimately relying on his intuitions about how we should apply our word water on discovering that what twin Earthers call water actually has a different microstructure. I mean, as Putnam sees it, our water is H2O, right? Water is H2O, so the stuff on twin Earth is not really water. But what if we just don't share in Putnam's intuitions here? And indeed, other philosophers report quite different reactions to this thought experiment. Some are inclined to say that actually XYZ just is water. And, you know, what Putnam has really described is a situation where it turns out that there are different types of water. This response is favoured by D.H. Mellor in his article Natural Kinds. Mellor grants that the term water had the same extension in 1750 as it has today, but Mellor says that the extension of the term water, both in 1750 and today, was both H2O and XYZ. At least, you know, in the scenario that Putnam describes, that is. And this was the extension of the term water as used by Earthers and the term water as used by twin Earthers. We both refer to both H2O and XYZ. There is no difference. What we discover when we discover that the liquid on Earth is H2O while the liquid on twin Earth is XYZ is that not all water shares the same microstructure. So there are different kinds of water. But then why should all water share the same microstructure? Why should all water be composed of H2O? If we just insist that H2O is an essential property of water, so anything that's not H2O is not water, well, that just begs the question in this context. I mean, that's one of the things that Putnam is supposed to be demonstrating. So as philosophers like Mellor see things, what makes something water is a matter of its, you know, manifest observable properties. Water is the liquid that falls from the sky when it rains, that quenches thirst, that makes up the rivers and oceans and so on. That's just what water is. If it turns out that on one planet H2O is what does this job, whereas on another planet XYZ is what does this job, well, we have two types of water. Again, we can't just presuppose that what makes something water is its microstructure. Like, maybe the world is such that there are just different kinds of water. Another concern about Putnam's argument is raised by Joseph Laporte in his article Natural Kinds and Conceptual Change. He considers a real-life example that is analogous to the Twin Earth case. Anyway, Laporte targets the third premise of the Twin Earth argument. He argues that the meaning of the term water did change from 1750 to today. So essentially the idea is this. In 1750, the extension of the term water, as it was used by people on Earth, was vague. So there was no exact set of things in the world to which the term water correctly applied. There were various liquids on Earth at the time that were determinately in the extension of the term water, and those liquids were composed of H2O. Maybe we can say that H2O was determinately water. But there were some things that were neither determinately in the extension nor determinately outside the extension, and this is the case for XYZ. If Earthers were to visit twin Earth, they would initially assume that the liquid there is water. On discovering that the liquid is composed of XYZ, the use of the term water would then become open to social negotiation. Do we apply the term water to this new liquid or not? That's going to depend on whether we place more weight on the microstructure or more weight on the manifest observable properties. But there's no fact of the matter one way or another which one should guide our use of the term. So Laporte discusses the history of the term jade. Actually, Putnam himself also mentions the example of jade, although Laporte argues that Putnam's claims about the history are incorrect. So Laporte focuses on the history of jade in China, which the Chinese called yu. I think that's how it's pronounced. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. Anyway, in China, jade was long considered to be the most precious gemstone. Its status was similar to the status that gold has in the West. So jade is of great social significance among the Chinese. Now, historically, the jade that was used in China was the mineral nephrite. For thousands of years, the Chinese worked with nephrite. So when they talked about yu, when they used their word yu, they were talking about nephrite. When they carved sculptures out of their most precious gemstone, they were carving sculptures out of nephrite. But then, in the 18th century, a stone that was very similar to nephrite in terms of its everyday observable properties, but which turned out to have a totally different chemical composition, was brought to China for the first time. And this is what we call jadeite. Jadeite is very like nephrite, and in China it's used in the same context as nephrite, and the same carving techniques are used for both. There are minor differences. Jadeite is slightly harder than nephrite, but for the purposes to which jade was put in everyday life, these differences didn't particularly matter. So jadeite is jade's XYZ. Now, the Chinese were aware from the start that this new mineral was different from the one that they were accustomed to working with, so they called it new jade. Then they faced the question of whether new jade was true jade. And as it happens, they decided that new jade was indeed true jade. So the term "you" came to apply to both nephrite and jadeite without qualification. Right, they're both you, right? So yeah, I mean, jadeite is new you, but that's no more special than the fact that nephrite is old you. As far as Chinese speakers are concerned, jadeite is you, and there are just different types of you, different types of jade. The similarity in the manifest properties of the minerals outweighed the significant differences in the microstructure. Now, it seems that if Putnam is right, we would have to say that Chinese speakers were mistaken to apply their term "you" to jadeite. The mineral to which they had always applied this term, and which they interacted with for hundreds of years, was nephrite. Jadeite has a completely different composition. So, "you" is nephrite, not jadeite. It was incorrect to say that "you" is jadeite, or that jadeite is "you." But this conclusion just seems outrageous, right? I mean, like, where's the error supposed to be here? As we noted, the Chinese speakers were aware that the minerals were different in some ways. They would not have been surprised by the discovery that they had different chemical compositions. I mean, they knew that they were different. But the point is that the differences just didn't matter to them. So as Laporte sees it, the Chinese were not incorrect to count jadeite as "you." But he also says they would not have been incorrect if the language had developed differently, if they had refused to count jadeite as "you." Suppose that when presented with jadeite, Chinese speakers had said, "No, that's not true jade." Well, fair enough, right? I mean, there is, after all, a difference between nephrite and jadeite. So if you want to say that that difference is what matters, and that difference means that jadeite is not true jade, fair enough. That wouldn't have been an error either. Now, what this illustrates is that language has a kind of open texture. The extension of the term "you" was vague. Prior to the discovery of the difference between nephrite and jadeite, there was no fact of the matter whether the term "you" referred to both or only to nephrite. Once the difference was discovered, speakers were forced to refine their use of the term and eliminate the vagueness. Today, there is no longer any vagueness. The term "you" refers to both nephrite and jadeite. But crucially, this was a decision, not a discovery. We discovered a new mineral with very similar manifest properties to the mineral that had always been called "you." We discovered that this new mineral had a very different chemical composition, and at that point, speakers have to decide what matters. Do they care more about the everyday observable properties of the mineral, or do they care more about its chemical composition? If they care more about the everyday properties, they're probably going to count it as "you." If they care more about the chemical composition, probably not. But either way, there's no question of error here. There's just a question of like what convention we establish to remove the vagueness from the term. So yeah, I mean, Laporte says that in fact, when we look at these sorts of real life cases, we find that Putnam's way of describing meanings, his expectations about what would happen in the Twin Earth case, are incorrect. Of course, whether this really challenges the broader point Putnam was making is perhaps a different question. As I've noted, on Laporte's view, the term "you" determinately referred to nephrite, and then it was there was no fact of the matter whether it referred to jadeite. So I suppose we could well set up the Twin Earth case and say, well, on Earth, water determinately referred to H2O. There was no fact of the matter whether it referred to XYZ. On Twin Earth, water determinately referred to XYZ. No fact of the matter whether it referred to H2O. That's still a difference. That's a difference in extension. So perhaps we can, accommodate the sorts of points that Laporte is making about, vagueness of meaning in the open texture of language, while still endorsing semantic externalisms, still endorsing the idea that meaning is fixed by not just what's going on in the head, but what's going on in the external environment. So that's that. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.